She stepped off the train on a Tuesday with 11 cents sewn into her hem and a letter in her pocket that no longer meant anything to anyone. The platform at Cedar Hollow was empty of the man who was supposed to be there. The wind was not. It moved through her thin coat the way judgment moves through a small town, quiet and thorough, and she stood with her satchel at her feet and did not cry, because crying was a thing she had already spent, somewhere further back down the line than anyone cared to ask about. They called her the woman nobody came for, and in Cedar Hollow, a name like that could follow a person longer than any husband would have. Word moved faster than she did. By the time she had walked the length of the depot twice, half the town already knew her business, and none of it kindly. Some things arrive in a town before a person ever does, and shame is the fastest traveler there is. But there was a man at the forge who did not come out to look at her, and did not come out to judge her either. He only listened to the train, the way a man listens for something he has been waiting on without ever saying so out loud. His hands were black with work, and his silence was the kind that had been earned, not practiced. He had buried more than most men admit to burying, and he had long since stopped expecting the world to hand him anything worth keeping. This is a story about what happens when two people, who have both been left standing somewhere, are finally left standing in the same place. It is about a roof offered without a claim on it, a supper shared without a question behind it, and a kind of patience that does not announce itself. Some love does not arrive with music. Some of it simply waits at a forge, working iron, until the moment comes to walk out into the cold. And by the time the snow came to Cedar Hollow that year, the town would tell it differently than they told it in the beginning. They would say the blacksmith never did anything sudden in his life. They would say the woman at the station never asked anyone for a single thing. And they would say, quieter than the rest, that some vows are not spoken at an altar at all. Some of them are built one evening at a time, in front of a fire that does not go out. Her name was Josephine Carter, and before Cedar Hollow, there had been another town. And before that town, a smaller one still, each one shrinking behind her like a coat she had outgrown. She had been a school teacher's daughter once, in a place with a proper church and a proper street, until her father's debts had come due all at once, the way debts do, and left her with nothing but his good name and none of his money. She had answered the advertisement in a Kansas newspaper because it was the only door left standing. The letter had promised a rancher named Elias Boone, a house with 2 rooms, and a life that did not require charity. It had not promised that Elias Boone would change his mind 3 weeks before her arrival and marry a widow from the next county instead, and it had certainly not promised that no one would think to tell her. The station master at Cedar Hollow was a heavy, unhurried man named Otis Pruitt, and he was the one who finally told her, an hour after the train had gone, that Mr. Boone was not coming. He did not say it unkindly. He simply said it the way a man delivers weather, because there was no other way to say it that would have made it smaller. Josephine had nodded and thanked him and asked where she might find a room for the night. And Otis had looked at her satchel and her thin coat and named a boarding house 2 streets over, run by a woman named Martha Dell, who kept a clean house and a sharper tongue. He did not offer to walk her there. In Cedar Hollow, a woman without a husband waiting was a question mark, and nobody wanted to be seen standing too close to a question mark before they knew the answer. Cedar Hollow was not a large town, and it did not pretend to be. It had 1 street of packed dirt that turned to mud every spring, a general store, a church with a bell that rang crooked, and a livery at the far end, where the smell of hay and horses mixed with wood smoke most evenings. Beyond the last building, the pines started, dark and close together, climbing the hills until they disappeared into cloud most mornings before the sun burned it off. Winters came early there and left late, and the townsfolk had a saying about it that Cedar Hollow kept its own calendar and answered to no one's almanac. It was a town built by people who had run out of other places to be, and it judged newcomers accordingly, because it had judged itself the same way once and had not forgotten how that had felt. By the time Josephine reached Martha Dell's boarding house, the story had already outrun her. 2 women on the porch of the general store had watched her pass, satchel in hand, and one had murmured something to the other behind a raised palm, and Josephine had not needed to hear the words to understand their shape. She had been the subject of that particular murmur before, in the town before this one, when her father's name had gone bad in the ledgers of half the county. She walked with her back straight anyway. It was not pride exactly. It was closer to the last available room in a house otherwise emptied out, the one thing left that nobody could repossess. Martha Dell answered her own door, a narrow woman with narrow opinions, and looked Josephine over from hem to collar before she said a word. She had heard already, of course. She said she had a room, 4 bits a night, payable in advance, and that she ran a respectable house and expected respectable conduct in return. And she said it in a tone that made clear which category she had already sorted Josephine into. Josephine paid what she had and did not correct her. There is a kind of dignity that spends itself on not arguing, and Josephine had learned to keep that particular coin for when it mattered more. It was near supper time when she went looking for work, because 11 cents does not rent a room twice. And a woman with empty hands in Cedar Hollow was a woman who did not stay a woman with empty hands for long. She tried the general store first, and the mercantile after that, and both times the answer came back the same, polite and final. The way a door is polite and final when it is closing. She was passing the livery on her way back, worn through in a way that had nothing to do with her shoes, when she heard the ring of a hammer on iron, steady as a heartbeat, coming from the low building set back from the road with its doors standing open to the evening air. The blacksmith did not look up right away. He was a broad-shouldered man named Nathan Reed, dark-haired, quiet in the particular way of men who have spent years working alone and found they preferred the company of it, and he was finishing a hinge for the church door, turning it in the tongs to catch the last of the light. He had heard, same as everyone, that the train had come and gone and left a woman standing on the platform, and he had heard, same as everyone, what people were already saying about her. He had not gone to look. It was not his business, and he was not a man who made other people's business his own without cause. But he had noticed, the way a man notices weather changing before anyone says a word about it, that something in the town's rhythm had shifted since morning. Josephine stopped at the open doors not to ask for anything, only because the heat of the forge reached the road, and the evening had turned cold faster than her coat could answer. Nathan set down the hinge. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to place, not with suspicion, but with the slow attention of someone unwilling to guess wrong. She said good evening, because her mother had raised her to say it regardless of circumstance, and he said the same back. And for a moment, neither of them said anything more, because there was nothing yet that needed saying. He asked finally if she had found a place to stay, and she told him Mrs. Dell's, and he nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a subject without dismissing it. He did not ask about Elias Boone. He did not ask about the train, or the platform, or what a woman traveled 100 miles for and found waiting on the other end. Some things are too large for naming, and a good man knows better than to reach for them on a first evening. He only said that the nights came on cold this time of year, and that Mrs. Dell kept a poor fire, and that if she needed kindling split, the livery had more than it used. It was not an offer of anything. It was smaller than that, and larger, both at once. Josephine thanked him and walked on toward the boarding house, and behind her the hammer started again, slow and even, filling the dusk the way it had filled every evening in Cedar Hollow for longer than anyone troubled to come. She did not look back to see if he watched her go. He did. Not long, and not obviously, the way a man watches something he has decided, without yet admitting it to himself, that he intends to keep watching. Josephine woke on Wednesday to a fire gone to ash and a chill that had settled into the corners of the small room. Martha Dell called hers for 4 bits a night. She lay still for a moment, counting what remained in the seam of her hem. And the number had not changed since the evening before, because there was no work yet to change it. Downstairs, she could hear Martha moving pots with more force than the task required, the sound of a woman making her opinions known without having to voice them. Josephine dressed, folded the quilt with more care than it deserved, and went down to face whatever the day intended to charge her. Martha was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, arms crossed over her apron, and she did not offer breakfast. She said the room was paid through the night before, and not a minute longer, and that she ran a house for respectable boarders, and that certain parties had come by already that morning, asking after the woman who arrived on the train, asking in a tone Martha did not care to have associated with her establishment. She did not name the certain parties. She did not need to. Josephine understood that she had become, in less than a day, a kind of weather the town preferred to watch from a safe distance rather than shelter. She left the boarding house with her satchel and no destination, and the street was already busy with the ordinary business of a town that had decided, collectively and without a meeting, what it thought of her. A woman outside the mercantile drew her child closer as Josephine passed, not sharply, just enough to be noticed. The bell above the store door rang cheerfully for everyone else. Josephine kept walking, past the church with its crooked bell, past the last of the proper houses, until the road bent toward the livery and the low building with its doors already standing open against the cold. Nathan was working the bellows when she reached him, feeding a fire that glowed orange against the dim of the morning, and he looked up before she had said anything, the way a man looks up when he has been listening for a particular set of footsteps without admitting it to himself. He asked if she had eaten. She said she had not, and did not dress it up as anything other than fact, because there was no strength left in her that morning for pretending. He set down his tools, disappeared into the small room at the back of the forge that served as his quarters, and came out with a heel of bread and a jar of molasses, and set them on the workbench without ceremony, the way a man sets down something that does not require thanks. He did not ask why Martha Dell had put her out. He had likely already heard, or would hear by noon, because Cedar Hollow kept few secrets, and fewer of them long. Instead, he said that the loft above the forge had a cot in it, unused since his apprentice had married and moved on the previous spring, and that it was dry and warmer than most rooms in town on account of the fire below, and that she was welcome to it until she found her feet, if she did not mind the smell of coal smoke. He said it plainly, the way a man offers the use of a tool, and he did not look at her while he said it, the way a man looks away from something he is trying not to make larger than it is. Josephine considered the offer the way she considered most things now, turning it for the trap she assumed must be in it somewhere. She asked carefully what he would want in return. Nathan answered that he could use a hand keeping his ledgers straight, since his own hand was better suited to iron than ink, and that the arrangement would end the moment either of them found it did not suit. There was no mention of anything beyond that, not unkindly but without any hurry. He went back to the bellows, leaving the decision entirely hers to make. And Josephine understood that this, too, was a kind of courtesy, the courtesy of not making a woman feel cornered by kindness. She took the loft. It was small and smelled of coal and cedar shavings, with one narrow window that looked out over the corral where Nathan kept 2 horses and a mule he was shoeing on trade. But it was dry, and it had a door that closed, and after 2 nights of sleeping in other people's judgment, that was closer to wealth than anything Josephine had known in some time. She began keeping his ledgers that same afternoon, correcting columns that had been added twice and subtracted once, and Nathan watched her work for a moment from across the forge with an expression she did not see, because she was not looking up to catch it. The town noticed, of course, because the town noticed everything, and its noticing came dressed as concern. Mabel Sutter, who ran the mercantile with her husband and her opinions in equal measure, made a point of remarking to anyone who would listen that a decent woman did not sleep above a bachelor's forge, decent arrangement or not, and that Nathan Reed had always been an odd sort of man to keep his own company so thoroughly. She said it loudly enough near the store window that Josephine, passing with a basket of mending she had taken on to earn her keep, heard every word of it and kept walking, because answering would have cost more than it earned. Nathan heard of it too eventually from Otis Pruitt at the livery counter, and he did not raise his voice or seek Mabel Sutter out to argue the point. He only said once to Otis that a woman doing an honest day's work for an honest roof was no scandal he recognized, and that folks were welcome to their talk so long as they kept it off his property. It was the longest speech anyone had heard him give in some time, and Otis repeated it around town with something like admiration, because Nathan Reed rarely spent that many words on anything, and spending them now on her behalf said more than the words themselves. Evenings settled into a rhythm neither of them named. Josephine cooked supper in the small kitchen behind the forge, using what little the general store would sell her on credit and what Nathan brought in trade from the farms he served, and the meals were plain, biscuits and salt pork and coffee gone dark from reuse. But they were shared at a table for two instead of eaten alone, and that alone changed the weight of them. Nathan split more kindling than the forge required and left it stacked by her door before she had to ask, and Josephine found herself watching for that stack each evening, the way a person watches for a habit they have come to trust. Some kindnesses do not announce themselves. They simply arrive, night after night, until a person stops expecting otherwise. One evening, mending by lamp oil at the small table, Josephine asked him without quite meaning to, why he had offered the loft at all, to a woman the whole town had already decided about. Nathan considered the question the way he considered the fit of a horseshoe, unhurried, wanting it right before he spoke it aloud. He said that a town's decision was rarely worth as much as it believed itself to be, and that he had learned long ago to judge a person by what they did with an empty hand, rather than by what others said about the hand itself. Josephine did not answer that. She only nodded and went back to her mending. And if her hands were steadier after that than they had been in some time, neither of them remarked on it, because some things are understood best when they are left unsaid. The trouble arrived on a Thursday, riding in on a man named Harvey Coombs, who kept a small freight business between Cedar Hollow and the county seat, and had, in the way of men who deal in other people's goods, developed an interest in other people's business as well. He had heard somewhere along his route that a Josephine Carter had left the county seat owing money to a dry goods merchant there, money her late father had borrowed against a name that no longer held any credit. Harvey brought this news to Cedar Hollow the way he brought everything else, for a price, and by Thursday evening it had passed from the mercantile to the church steps to the counter at Otis Pruitt's depot, gathering weight with every telling. Josephine heard it first from Mabel Sutter, who delivered it to her directly, in the middle of the street, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting for confirmation of her own suspicions. Mabel said it was a fine thing, wasn't it, for a woman to come into a decent town trailing debts she had not troubled to mention, and worse still to be sheltered by a man too soft-hearted to ask the right questions before he opened his door. Josephine did not deny the debt. It was her father's, not hers, but the distinction meant little in a town already inclined to believe the worst, and she said only that she intended to see it settled, though she did not yet know how. Mabel's expression suggested she had expected exactly that answer and found it exactly as unsatisfying as she had hoped. Harvey Coombs, for his part, did not deliver his news without purpose. He came by the forge that same evening, while Nathan was out shoeing a horse at the Whitfield place, and found Josephine alone at the table with the ledgers. He was a narrow man with a narrow smile, the kind that never quite reached the rest of his face, and he told her, with the air of a man doing her a great favor, that he had connections at the county seat who might be persuaded to forget the debt entirely, provided she came to some understanding with him. He did not say marriage outright. He did not need to. The offer sat on the table between them the way a coin sits on a table, small and cheap, and meant to be picked up quickly before the person offering it changed their mind. Josephine told him, plainly and without raising her voice, that she would settle her own debts in her own time, and that she required no understanding of the kind he was suggesting. Harvey's smile thinned at that, and he said before he left that a woman in her position could not afford to be particular about her offers, and that Cedar Hollow was not so large a town that she would find many others. He said it the way a man says something he intends to be remembered, and then he took his hat and went, leaving the door open behind him, as though he had not decided the visit was worth the courtesy of closing it. Nathan returned an hour later to find Josephine still at the table, the ledger open in front of her but untouched, her hands folded too still to be resting. He did not ask directly what had happened. He set down his tools, checked the fire, and only then asked, in the plain way he asked most things, whether Harvey Coombs had been by. Josephine told him what had passed, keeping her voice even, because she had learned that a steady voice cost her less than an unsteady one. And Nathan listened without interrupting, his jaw set in a way she had not seen it set before. Some things are too large for naming, and he did not try to name what he felt. He only said when she had finished that he would see to it. He did not say how, and Josephine did not ask, because there was something in the set of his shoulders that told her the matter was, in some manner she could not yet see, already settled in his mind. The next morning he rode out early, before the forge fire was lit, and returned past midday with the matter of Harvey Coombs, somehow smaller than it had been, though Josephine never learned the particulars and never asked for them. What she did learn, from Otis Pruitt, who made it his business to know such things, was that Nathan had ridden to the county seat, spoken with the dry goods merchant directly, and arranged to settle the debt himself, in trade for ironwork owed over the coming year. He had not told Josephine this. He had simply done it, the way a man does something he does not intend to be thanked for. When she found out, 3 days later, from Otis rather than from Nathan himself, she went to the forge at dusk and stood in the doorway until he noticed her, and asked him plainly why he had not told her and why he had done it at all, when the debt was not his to carry. Nathan set down the tongs and considered the question the way he considered most things, unhurried, wanting the answer right before he gave it. He said that a debt paid quietly was worth more than one paid loudly, and that he had not done it to be owed anything in return, only because it seemed to him a poor kind of world where a woman could be bought and sold over her father's mistakes. Some debts are not paid in coin. Some of them are paid simply by refusing to let another person be diminished by what they cannot help. Josephine did not know what to do with a kindness that large and that quiet, and for a moment she only stood there, the lamp behind her throwing her shadow long across the forge floor. Nathan did not reach for her hand. He set his own hand instead on the workbench beside hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth of it without either of them closing the distance further, the way a man rests his hand near something he is not yet ready to claim as his. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The fire popped once behind the grate, and somewhere out past the corral, a horse shifted against the cold, and the silence between them held something neither was prepared to say aloud, though both in their own quiet way had already begun to understand it. She told him, finally, that she would find a way to repay him, whatever the ironwork amounted to, and Nathan said only that he was in no hurry, that some accounts were better left open a while, and there was a lightness in the way he said it that had not been there before Harvey Coombs had ridden into town at all. Josephine went back to the ledgers that evening with something different in her hands. Not quite ease, but the beginning of it, the way frost begins to loosen its hold on a window before the sun has fully cleared the ridge. Outside, the wind moved through the pines above the town, steady and low, indifferent to debts and rumors alike, carrying on exactly as it had before any of this had happened, and exactly as it would after. Winter came to Cedar Hollow in earnest that year, arriving the way it always did, without patience for anyone's readiness, and the snow settled over the pines until the whole valley seemed to hold its breath under it. Josephine had been keeping Nathan's ledgers for 3 months by then, and mending for half the town besides. And the loft above the forge had stopped feeling like borrowed shelter and started feeling like something closer to a home, though neither of them had said the word aloud. The debt to the county seat merchant was paid down, a little at a time, in ironwork Nathan delivered on his regular rounds, and Harvey Coombs had not shown his face in Cedar Hollow since the arrangement had been settled, which Otis Pruitt considered proof enough of what kind of man he had been to begin with. The town, for its part, had not changed its mind all at once. Mabel Sutter still watched Josephine cross the street with the same narrow attention she gave to anyone she had already judged, and there were women at church who still angled their conversation away when Josephine came near, as though her presence might rub off on their own respectability. But something had begun to shift in the smaller exchanges, the ones that mattered more than anyone admitted. The widow Hodges had taken to nodding at her outside the mercantile. Otis Pruitt had started calling her Mrs. Carter instead of the woman off the train, a small correction that carried more weight than he likely intended. Some changes do not arrive with announcement. They arrive the way thaw arrives, 1 degree at a time, until a person looks up and the ice has simply gone. It was a boy named Tommy Hale, orphaned the winter before, and taken in by the widow Hodges out of Christian duty more than affection, who did the thing that finally settled the matter for the whole town to see. He had taken to following Josephine on her errands some afternoons, drawn by the molasses cookies she kept in her basket, and by a kindness in her that asked nothing of him in return. And on a Tuesday in late December, in front of the mercantile, with half the street watching, he tugged at her skirt and called her Mama, plain as anything, the word out of his mouth before he had thought to measure it. Josephine went still. The street went stiller. And for a moment, nobody moved at all, as though the whole town were waiting to see what she would do with a word that large. She did not correct him. She knelt instead, in the cold, and settled her hand over his, and said only that she was glad to see him, in a voice steady enough that no one watching could call it anything but tenderness. It was not a claim she had asked for, and it was not one she had expected, but she did not push it away. And something in that refusal to push it away said more to the women watching from the mercantile porch than any speech could have managed. Mabel Sutter, who had come out to sweep her step at exactly the wrong moment, said nothing at all. And her silence, for once, was as close to an apology as the town was going to get. Nathan heard about it that evening from Otis, who told it with more feeling than he usually allowed himself, and he did not say much in response, only nodded and went back to banking the forge fire for the night. But later, after supper, when Josephine sat mending by the lamp and Tommy Hale had long since been walked home to the widow Hodges, Nathan set down the harness he had been oiling and said, without preamble, that he had been meaning to ask her something and had been putting it off only because he wanted to be certain he asked it the right way. Josephine set down her mending. Nathan did not reach for her hand outright. He set his own hand on the table beside hers instead, close enough to matter, not over it but beside it. The way a man commits to something without demanding an answer, be rushed. He said that he had no family of his own to speak of, no name worth much beyond what he had built with his own 2 hands at the forge, and that he was not a man given to fine words or promises made lightly. He said that he had watched her these 3 months doing an honest day's work without complaint, and holding her dignity through more than most women would have borne quietly, and that somewhere in that watching he had come to want, more than he had wanted anything in a long while, for the arrangement between them to become something less easily undone. It was not a grand proposal. It did not need to be. Some vows are not spoken all at once at an altar. Some of them are built one evening at a time in front of a fire that does not go out. And by the time a man finally says the words, the answer has usually long since been settled in the space between two people. Josephine did not answer with speeches either. She turned her hand over beneath his on the table so that her palm met his palm, and said only that she would be glad of it, and that she could think of worse things than a name built on iron and patience rather than money and easy promises. Nathan's mouth moved at one corner. The way it did on the rare occasions, something pleased him more than he let on. And that was the whole of it. Plain and unhurried, the way most things worth having in Cedar Hollow tended to be. They were married that January in the church with the crooked bell, with Tommy Hale standing between them in his good coat, and Otis Pruitt gave the bride away because there was no one else left to do it, and he did so looking prouder than the occasion strictly called for. The wind moved through the pines above Cedar Hollow that winter the same as it always had, indifferent to weddings and debts and the slow turning of a town's opinion. The fire in the forge burned on, banked low through the coldest nights and built high again each morning, the way it had before Josephine ever stepped off any train, and the way it would long after. The horses shifted in the corral, and smoke rose steady from the chimney above the loft that was no longer a loft, but a home. And the river at the edge of town locked under ice and waited, the way it did every year, for a spring that always came eventually, no matter how long the winter held on. The fire burned. The world continued. And that was the story of Josephine and Nathan Reed, a woman who stepped off a train with 11 cents and a stranger's broken promise and left with a name built on iron, patience, and a family. No one had thought to plan for her hat, but that suited her better than any plan could have. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.